Session 6 in our Foundations course of the No Man Left Behind self-paced training. I'm David Delk, president of Man in the Mirror. I'm here with Charles Cooper, Brett Clemmer, and Pat Morley. In the last session, we talked about keeping discipleship as the portal priority in our church and how important it was to let men know that all these different opportunities they have, that the main thing we're interested in is that they're growing in their faith relationship with Jesus Christ. In this session, we're going to look at the idea of leadership. And guys, how have you seen leadership being important in the life of a sustainable discipleship ministry with men?
Well, you said it. First of all, any men's discipleship initiative is not sustainable without the right leadership in place. Bill Bright, the founder of Campus Crusade, was very fond of saying over and over again, I heard him say this, that everything boils down to leadership. Mm-hmm. And so in the research that we've done at Man in the Mirror, we have discovered and found categorically the importance, for example, that the pastor have a vision to disciple every man in the church, the determination to make that happen, whatever it takes, and some kind of a sustainable strategy to pull that off. So just one example, but leadership is just so crucial to this whole process.
Yeah, we've seen this in my church. You know, our pastor is the champion for men's discipleship. He likes to address men at least in a sentence or two, at least, specifically during sermons. He does what it takes to make sure that guys know that he thinks that their faith is important and that it's important to him. And so when the guys in the church see our pastor doing that, well, then they go, oh, well, I guess I'm supposed to do that too. And it really motivates and energizes all the leadership of the church.
It's so critical to have that leadership. And I think of all the books that I've read, one of the ones that was most impactful had to do with the going from good to great in business and how that translates to the church. And one of those chapters very early talks about, having people on the bus, but making sure they're in the right seat, getting them in the right place. And leadership is so critical to that, that without it, you really have planned to fail. If you haven't planned to really take the time to put the right person in the right place to be successful for what you're trying to achieve.
Well, that's great. Those are great words, Charles. And especially for you watching this video, you're a leader, you want to make a difference, and you don't want to burn out. You don't want to be sitting around 2 or 3 years from now thinking, oh, well, that was a waste of time. So this session is going to be very helpful to you, not only in your role right now as a leader, but also in thinking through how do we continue this process of building leadership for the long term so that men can continue to be discipled in our church. So let's go back to our session now and learn more about the idea of 3 strands of leadership.
Hey guys, welcome back. We're here at the Foundations, Course 1 Foundations of the No Man Left Behind self-paced training. And today we're going to talk about the third foundation at the base of the No Man Left Behind model called the 3 strands of leadership. You've all seen the verse in Ecclesiastes 4, though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves, and a cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. And this is especially true when it comes to your leadership. If you'll build these 3 strands of leadership into your men's discipleship efforts, it will take you a lot farther than if you don't have any one of these 3. So let's jump right into this. The first strand of leadership that we have has to do with your pastor. And when you're talking about men's ministry, men's discipleship, a lot of times we hear talk of churches that are just, I hear guys say, my pastor doesn't get it, my pastor doesn't care. And we really don't buy that at Man in the Mirror. I got to tell you, it's just not fair and it's not true. I want you to think about the typical week in the life of a pastor. In the typical week of a life of a pastor, nobody calls the pastor and says, hey, I just wanted to let you know my son got great grades. Right? They call the pastor and say, hey, I found pot in the top drawer of my son's dresser. What do I do? Nobody calls the pastor and says, Pastor, you're not going to believe this really romantic thing that my husband did for me last week. No, they call the pastor and they say, Pastor, I don't know if my marriage is going to hold together. And so you have to realize that pastors, day in and day out, week in and week out, they are hearing the worst of the worst that happens in your church. And so when you say to them, hey, Pastor, I'd like to get a men's ministry going, they go, yeah, that's great. Go for it. And the reason they say go for it and not what can I do is because you, I hate to tell you this, but you are not the first person to come into their office and say, I've got this great idea, let's have a men's ministry. If your pastor's been a pastor for very long, you might be the 3rd or the 5th or the 15th person that's come in, and unfortunately, your predecessors may have not been very successful in getting some kind of a organized men's discipleship, men's ministry going. And so your pastor is going to let you go for it, but he's going to wait and he's going to see if it works or not before he puts a lot of time and energy into it, because he is spread so thin already. The thought of adding even one more thing to his plate can just seem overwhelming. So how do you get your pastor's enthusiastic support and involvement in your ministry? Well, I would say it's not about convincing him that your ministry is good. I think it's more about convincing him that you as the leader and the group of men that you have helping you lead your ministry, that you are enthusiastically supportive of your pastor. And so let's look at the different ways that we can support our pastors. The first thing that we can do for our pastors is that we need to pray for them. You know, don't tell them that you're praying for them. All right? Pray for them, but don't tell them that you're praying for them. Why is that? Because there are a lot of people that have walked up to your pastor and said, "Pastor, just want you to know, I'm praying for you." And then nothing ever happens. The person never asked them, "Hey, how can we pray for you this week?" So pray for your pastor. Get the men that you're leading the men's discipleship efforts with to pray for your pastor. But until you've been faithful for a while, don't run to your pastor and say, "Hey, we're praying for you, pastor. We want you to know that." Just pray. Maybe after a while, maybe you get your guys together on Sunday mornings. I've heard of a church that did this. They get their guys together on Sunday mornings before the first service, and they just have a prayer time for their pastor. And they waited months of doing this faithfully before they said to their pastor, "Hey, would you like to come and pray with us, and maybe we could pray for you as you get ready for service this Sunday morning." But they made sure that they were faithful before they jumped into it. The next thing you can do is you can support your pastor. You know, I was on a men's adventure trip with my church once, and one of the guys stood up. We were talking about the church, and he was talking about how much he loved our church. And he said, you know what strikes me about this is that, like, if I hear someone say something bad about my church or bad about my pastor, it gets me mad. It's like they're talking about my mom. It's like, you don't talk about my mom. You don't talk about my church. You don't talk about my pastor. And the men's leadership team in your church, they need to have the reputation that you don't talk bad about the pastor in front of those guys, because they'll stick up for the pastor every time. If you have an issue with the pastor, that you don't agree with something or you don't like something, you go and you talk to them about it, but you don't talk to anybody else about it. We need to have the reputation as men's leaders that we support our pastors, that we're praying for them, that we're supporting them, that we're not letting anybody else pick on them. It's tough to be a pastor. You have a big target on your back all the time when you're the pastor. Everybody's watching you. And so the men of the church need to have the pastor's back all the time. The third thing we need to do is keep our pastors informed. You know, the worst thing that can happen is for your pastor to get surprised by something that they didn't know was about to happen. I've heard pastors tell me, "Yeah, it was great. I told the guys that they could do a big event one weekend, and then I found out a week later that the women had already had something on the calendar that weekend, and I didn't know about it." So now he's got the head of one ministry upset with him or her, the head of another ministry upset with them, and the next thing they know, they're brokering a little argument. You know, they're trying to be negotiator. All of a sudden, you've turned them into a diplomat, and they don't need to be a diplomat. They need to be the pastor of the church. So keep your pastor informed. Make sure that they always know what's going on. If you have leadership team meetings and somebody takes notes, copy the pastor in the email. Always make sure the pastor knows what's going on. And that way also they can give you any feedback or information that you may not know about that the pastor knows about. They can give you that information and keep everybody from getting into trouble by accident. The fourth thing is to include your pastor, but include your pastor in the way that they want to be included. Now, we got a great pastor at my church, and we always have our men's adventure trip every year. And we have a deal that on our trip, Pete is just one of the guys. He's just one of the guys. We don't make him pray before meals. We don't make him speak to the group. He's just there to be one of the guys. That's what he wants. Now, you may have a pastor that likes to pray before the meals, that likes to lead devotional time. However your pastor wants to be included, include them in your activities in an appropriate way that meets their needs and their desires as well as your pastor. And then finally, love your pastor. Another way to say this would be to say, serve your pastor. And I would write this down. Love my pastor tangibly. Serve my pastor